Hello everyone, hope you're all having a great day. Remember that if anyone does anything bad to you that's unjust or unfair, it's not you at all, it's them, and you have no reason to feel bad. The way I look at it is like you could have every person on planet Earth say every negative and bad thing about a random object like a tree, but it's not going to make any difference to it whatsoever. Like, you could have someone saying the worst things in the world to you in another language, but it's meaningless if you don't give it attention, and it doesn't change you, so just think of that. Hope you enjoy these stories, and I love you, and I'll speak to you soon. In December of 2002, one of my best friends, R, was getting married, and I had moved off the peninsula a couple of years ago, and had never met her, but apparently they had been together for a while. Against my advice, he joined the Marines and was marrying his girl before getting shipped off to Iraq for his first tour. My other two friends, K and W, came back to our old hometown of Port Angels for the wedding as well. We had a good time the night before the wedding and woke up early to make the 50-hour drive to Forks for the ceremony at the courthouse. Things started out bad, as a tyre on my car blew out early on the way there. We're forced to make the rest of the trip on my friend's spare tyre under 20 miles per hour. And we're almost late, but made it, and they had a nice little ceremony before we went to the bride's grandmother's house for the reception. The festivities didn't end until well after dark. The drive back to Port Angels was risky to make with a spare tyre. It was overcast, foggy and pitch black. There are no street lamps on the highway between Forks and PA. My car was small and black, and we had almost been hit by speeding cars in the daytime. I wasn't going to be able to get back to PA until I had a new tyre, but there was nowhere left in Forks open to buy one at the time. We're going to have to find somewhere to bed down until the morning. The bride asked if we could crash at her grandma's, but the grandma said she's too afraid that we're going to do stuff to her, out of her mind clearly. It was way too cold to sleep in my car. I had spent too much money on the party the night before, being the best man and all, and we couldn't get money together for a room. The bride suggested her grandmother's cabin. Her other grandmother had passed away a few months ago, and the cabin she lived in is out towards LA Push was vacant. My friend Kay inexplicably said, "No way. I'm going to take the last bus back to PA, see ya," and walked out the door without another word. That should have been a huge sign that something was wrong, but I'm not going to be sleeping in my car. I grabbed my things out my car, and Dar and his wife drove us out to her grandmother's cabin about 15 minutes out of town. It was called a cabin because it's in the middle of nowhere, but it was really just a small 2-story house. There was a lamp in the driveway, but other than that, everything's pitch black out. Now R and his bride let W and I inside have a look around. Most of the furniture has already been removed. There was a card table and a couple of metal chairs in the kitchen and a wardrobe still in my bedroom. The wardrobe's completely empty, however. Its contents are in a pile in the middle of the room and formed a man-sized nest. My uncle uses this place as a hunting lodge sometimes. Now, he's a bit crazy and hasn't got over my grandmother's death. She volunteers. If he finds you here, he'll be mad, so hide. Honestly, but we have lots of Pepsi and beer in the fridge, so help yourselves. W and I felt exactly as you'd imagined, but at this point, it was either stay here in the cabin or try and camp outside where it's below freezing. R and his wife went to have their wedding night while W and I figured out exactly where we was gonna hide if said uncle come finding us. There was a set of retractable stairs, and this went up to the attic where we found a couple of dusty, stained single mattresses covered with handmade quilts and husks of thousands and thousands of dead insects. We decided it's best to retract the chair and hide out in the attic for the night. Apparently, the crazy uncle preferred to sleep in a pile of his dead mother's clothes. The kitchen's devoid of knives, but I found a wood splitting maul on the back porch. We kept it upstairs just in case. In my backpack, I still have a couple of malt liquors left over from the night before. Without a TV or radio, we have no other form of entertainment, so we sat there drinking. Without any clocks available, we lose track of time and had a decent buzz going. What we had heard though sobered us up quickly. We heard a noise that sounded like the doorknob downstairs being shaken violently. With wide eyes, we look at each other and listen carefully. The noise occurred a couple more times. I slowly move to a window and try and quickly peek out to see if there's a car in the driveway. Nothing. We began to talk again, but once again, are violently interrupted by what sounded like the refrigerator door slamming shut and chairs moving, but no voices. I grabbed them all and went to the top of the stairs, just terrified. As suddenly as the noise started, it stopped, and we began to wait in silence and heard nothing. We're freaking the hell out. We couldn't go to sleep, but we got bored and began talking again in whisper. Without a clock or watch, I don't know how long after we heard the chairs move, it was when the phone began to ring. We waited for the phone to stop, or somebody downstairs to answer it, but it kept ringing. It kept ringing beyond any normal duration. I figured the crazy uncle, if he is there, was gonna pick it up long ago, so we're probably alone. The only people we knew who were there was R and his wife. With the number of rings, I assumed it's an emergency, and I lowered the stairs and took them all with me just in case. I braced for an attack, but no one came. Nobody was waiting for me at the bottom. I could see the kitchen was clear. I walk over to the still ringing phone and pick it up. The ringing stopped, but there's not even a dialer tone. The phone's dead. I pick up the phone and looked at it. It wasn't plugged in at the wall. It was an old rotary phone with mechanical bells that looked like it had been made in the 60s, and it sits there in silence. I used the bathroom and went back upstairs and told W about the phone. He says I'm messing around. I say go and check. W's scared. He needed to take a leak but's too scared to go downstairs, and peed out of the second floor window instead. The window stuck open and was freezing. I was freaking mad and worried. The phone starts ringing again. We sat and counted the rings. It got up to 170. I wasn't going back downstairs to answer the unplugged phone. I lay on the mattress, listening to it until I passed out. In the morning, W and I woke up freezing. We had no idea when I would be coming up to us, but decided we would search around for a phone. The night before, I heard the unplugged phone. We can't find it now. There's only one phone in the property. It's still unplugged in the kitchen. I look over it. There's no batteries or anything, not even a dial tone. Nothing. There are some strange experiences from a camping trip in northern Ontario I went on back when I was a little kid with my dad and stepmom. I want to preface this by saying that, despite the things I'm writing about, it was still a good experience. My parents split amicably when I was very young, and I didn't actually live with my dad. I still get to see him though, and these kinds of trips are like a bonding experience and pretty fun, to be honest. I just don't want this to overshadow that. Okay, time for my story. My dad and stepmom rented a tiny cabin in northern Ontario one summer for a family friend. I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm certain it's in the north of Midland. The cabin was on a lake, and the owner ferried us there on a tiny motorboat. This wasn't an island, mind you. I think there were only a few roads to access it. Some strange things happen on this trip, and while there isn't a single cohesive timeline here, I am not an experienced writer. So the first experience, the owner had left a canoe at the cabin, and we took it out on a lot of trips to the lake. Usually later in that day. I was obsessed with frogs and fish and wildlife as a kid, and this lake was loaded with marshes, so I loved these outings. I remember one in particular. It was almost sunset, and we're heading back through one of the marshes, and I hear a faint humming sound, similar to that of a transformer from the tree line. My dad/stepmom noticed it too as it grew louder. It stopped all of a sudden a few moments later, but so does everything else. The sounds of birds, frogs, etc., and any wildlife has completely stopped, and everything went silent. Then suddenly, all of the sounds started again. I have no explanation for it, and it is creepy as hell. My second experience was the cabins on the shoreline, but there wasn't a beach or anything close to one. It was actually very steep and a rocky shore around the entire area, but once you got in the water, there was sand, mussels, crayfish around there. My dad got the idea to catch some for cooking. My dad isn't a woodsman by any means, but he's a very resourceful guy. So we canoed to a sandy area close to the shore, and waded out to catch mussels on both sides of the water here. The shore's very steep, and it's like 2 floors up with thick forests at the top. At some point during our escape, I caught a glimpse of something along the tree line on the shore. I can't make it out very well, but it's white, almost like the texture of a birch, and lanky. I remember thinking it's definitely not a person, but it wasn't too far from the general shape of one. It staggered around, lethargically and slow. If it was an animal, something was wrong with it. I waded over to my dad and told him to look up, but now it's gone. I never saw anything like it again since. My third experience is one that I don't actually remember. Instead, my dad told me about it. On one of our canoe outings, my dad and stepmom decided to visit this little peninsula on the other side of the lake close to the marshes area. We got there and dragged the canoe onto that little shoreline there and walked single file. There wasn't a path, but the trees weren't particularly dense either. Enough so where you can see the water when you look back. Pretty soon after, he noticed that the entire place is covered in mushrooms, and live trees had given way to downed and dead trees further inland. This is unusual because it didn't look like there had been a fire or anything. They're just dead. It also started smelling really bad. Not wanting to endanger us by going further, we all turned back. He didn't want to let on that he was very nervous, but he told me it seriously freaked him out, and he never saw anything like it again, or could ever locate that again after. On to the fourth. This is something my dad told me that happened to him during a trip a couple of years ago. He went hiking by himself at some point, and when he was deeper into the woods, everything around just stopped. No sound whatsoever. No movement. No wind or even leaves falling. And it all returns a minute later. And nothing else eventful happened for the rest of his hike. But it's one thing he's never been able to explain. The fifth is we spent most nights having fires outside. And on one night, my dad and I stayed up watching X-Files on this tiny black and white TV. I'm actually not sure of how this place even had power since it wasn't accessible by road. Maybe it had a generator. or even a small PV or battery setup for all I know. There wasn't much other than a couple of lights, that TV, and a small water pump at the lake. Anyway, I was young and X-Files was spooking me out. During one episode, we both heard that humming coming from outside. Like when we were on the canoe, it was faint but there. We go outside with flashlights to see if we can identify it, but we see nothing. We didn't want to go into the woods this late either or to canoe out, but it wasn't far away. We just went back inside. It wasn't intermittent throughout the rest of the night, sometimes getting louder and quieter. In the morning, our water wasn't working. My dad went out to investigate, and apparently, the cable into the pumps had been messed with. We don't know who done it. For my sixth experience, this is probably the most unsettling one that I remember. I'd woken up earlier than everyone else, because I was hyped to go out and catch toads and frogs and whatever else I could find. I even set a trap for the chipmunks there. I remember one morning, I had woken up just before sunrise and was still in bed. In the window adjacent to my bed, I saw something that usually wasn't there. It was half a face poking around the edge of the window, staring into the cabin. Sickly pale orange with giant black holes where the eyes are supposed to be. Obviously not human. I'm terrified and hid, and eventually fell back to sleep. And when I wake up again, everyone's awake, and there's no signs of anything there. I always thought of this particular experience as something I imagined after waking up. It had to be. About a month ago, I met up with my dad while visiting my home city, and we got talking about this trip again. He mentioned that there were quite a few times when he felt uneasy. For example, my dad usually goes jogging early in the morning for exercise. He decides to abstain a couple of mornings as the cabin's nice and warm, but he can't shake the feeling that something's creepy. I only connected this with the window incident after our conversation, but when I did it really made me think about the entire trip as a reason I decided to write a post about it. I can't undeniably prove what happened, but for what it's worth, you can see the history adds up weirdly. These are all the experiences I can think of for now. I'm sure there's more that my mum or dad had that they haven't told me yet. I'll share them if I get more. So my story begins in the sticks of Missouri at an old campsite. For a few years, everyone on my mum's side of the family would meet and stay at the campsite owned by a family friend. It lies in Mississippi and is miles away from any town. It's on about 20 acres of overall mostly cleared land, but with woods lining the perimeter, and has a pool, cafeteria/mess hall, gymnasium, and about 10 cabins. It sits next to an old plantation house that was turned into a shop on the Underground Railroad. It has a secret room behind the fireplace that held people. Anyway, my mum, her siblings, and my grandmother all went to the camp when they were about 10 to 13 years old. So, this place is about 90 years old. There are signatures all over the cabin interiors from the past campers dating from the early 20th century until present. The aunts and female cousins stayed in one cabin while the men all stayed in another, and my brother and one cousin decided to be bold and stay in one up the hills by themselves. Needless to say, they didn't get much sleep that night and were pretty creeped out the next day, but that's not their story. On one side of the room, we had pushed the beds together to make a giant combo bed. I was on the bottom of a bunk bed at the edge of the combo bed furthest from the screened wooden door. My cousin A was on the top bunk, and two other cousins were to my right in the next beds. So after the last day, we're all winding down from activities and fun, telling stories until eventually we fall asleep. A few hours later, I wake up for no apparent reason, but when I looked towards the screen, I saw a blonde/whitish hair bounce outside. I didn't think much of it because my cousins are blonde and have a blonde cousin. I figured they were just messing around and went back to sleep. A bit later, I woke up again and I saw a complete apparition of a woman standing in the centre of the cabin, rapidly surveying the rooms. She's almost completely opaque white, I'd say about 90%, and dressed in 19th century working class garbs. She was looking around the room, and to me, she seemed confused as to what we're all doing in there, but I don't feel any negative presence. At this point, I was still in a stupor from having been awoken in the middle of the night, so grabbed my flashlight, shining it on her, and said, "What?" in a whispered yell. Had I been completely conscious, this wouldn't have happened, but it's a reflex. As soon as the light hits her, she vanishes. When she vanished, I felt unable to comprehend what had happened, and I just rolled back to sleep. Now, the next morning, I had somewhat of a realization/remembrance of what happened, but I didn't want to tell anyone what happened at fear of having it dismissed or no one believing me. We were all getting ready for the day and walking to the mess hall for lunch, when my cousin asked me if I'd seen anything weird. Shocked and relieved, I tell her the story. Apparently, she had woken up before and saw the woman in her room. Not knowing how to react, she slowly turned over and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, she heard me click my flashlight and exclaimed. She said she also didn't feel that she was a negative presence, but was shocked by what she saw. We eventually went back over the story together, and it turns out we both experienced unexplainable things throughout our lives. We had just never talked to anyone about it, because we've assumed no one would understand or want to. She suggested we possess some sort of negativity or sensitive thing that makes us aware of presences and energies around us. I agree with it, and we don't often share these stories with anyone. We did tell the story to the rest of the family, but they never believed us. I just moved into the 3rd floor of an apartment building, which is at the bottom of a very steep hill. From my bedroom window, I could see an old wooden staircase through the trees. It wasn't easy to access, and there was nothing behind the apartment except for the hill, which began only a few feet away from the back of the building. It looked like the kind of steps you'd see on a nature trail, except they started several feet up on the bank of the hill, with no easy way to get there because of the climbing. So I did. I slipped and fell at least once and had to grab onto a little tree trunk to stop me falling. I probably should have done it on a nice sunny day, but curiosity got the better of me, and this town wasn't known for having lovely weather. I got to the staircase, walk up it with ease, and once I reached the top, I look around for any evidence of its original purpose. I expected to find a hidden picnic area, or an overgrown nature trail. Something that would make sense, but there's nothing. And also, nowhere for anything to be. The hill just kept going without levelling off, so I kicked the leaves around for a bit, thinking that maybe there were more stairs. I found nothing and gave up. After coming home, I did a brief search of nature trails in the area and tried to look at old aerial views to see if I could see anything. None of this yielded any theories that I can recall, but I do remember not being able to find the staircase on maps either. I thought this could be explained by leaves in the way, but there weren't any. When I went to the drop-off, I had to give my rent to the manager, and I asked her if there was any stairs in the woods behind the apartment. Her response was, "What stairs?" I asked if there'd been anything there, but she said no. There was a house a lot further up the hill, but no stairs. A few months later, I drove my roommate to the ATM and noticed a set of steps on the hill by the bank. There must have been a building there at some point, but it's now gone. I asked my roommate if he knew anything about the mystery stairs behind our apartment, and wasn't surprised to find out that he hadn't noticed any. He never paid much attention to anything that wasn't a video game. When we went home, I tried to explain where it was and show him from my bedroom window, but I can't see them. We couldn't see him from his window either, so I decided to go back out looking again. I walk around the back corner, looked up the hill and was confused when I don't see the stairs, since they've been in the woods. I figure they must have got covered up by leaves or debris, but that doesn't explain it. "Let me know if you find them," my roommate says as he goes back inside, and I never found it. And to this day I have no logical explanation to where it possibly could have gone. Perhaps it was a temporary installation by an art student, but if there was an art student, you would have heard about it. Plus, it looked like it had been there for years and there was no evidence left behind. I think I would have noticed if someone removed it too, and God, it would have been noisy. Seems like it would have taken a lot of time too. And then I would have found evidence also. I've heard about people finding strange things like stairs in the woods before, and I never thought I would see it either. But I really have no explanation for it. Creeps the hell out of me thinking about it. So my house is on the biggest chunk of property in this area. It's on about 110 acres and was originally kind of a park. Unfortunately, people from all over didn't get that memo that we moved in, and therefore continue to party, hunt and fish whenever they want. Over the years, these problems began to go away, minus a few. Before we talk about the perpetrators, or at least their leaders, we should discuss what was behind the property. It's an asylum near the woods, mostly housing psychopaths, schizophrenics, and those who have suffered mental breakdowns. Now, it isn't rare to hear some random screaming for no reason over there. So back to my story. There were 4 men who kept coming back and hunting in the middle of night. We let some people hunt in the night on Saturdays, but for the most part, hunting's off limits. We're never able to catch these 4 men, always wearing masks. I mention that because the leader always wore a creative mask, a scary one, most of the time wearing a pig one. These men were sneaky, smart, that's what made them scary. Now, I had 3 encounters with them, the first being in June of last year. A few friends and I decided to go on an adventure throughout the woods, and we discovered something frightening. We found a fortress, covered in beer cans, with a chair on top. Being the teenagers we are, we decided the smart thing to do is to destroy all the hunters' hard work by kicking the whole thing down. Oh God, have we messed up. We later returned to the fortress, and it's rebuilt, almost like a shrine to the last one. And spray painted on the ground was "Try again, we dare you." Encounter 2 happened during a simple walk at night. Sometimes when I get upset, I walk through the woods. This time was at night, and it just so happened that the hunters were also out. So I was walking along, minding my own business, when I see the man in the pig mask. He sees me. He now knows my face. I hear a deep laugh and he turns his gun towards me. I have no idea what he's gonna do, but I book it out of there. Encounter 3, in my opinion, the most blood-curdling. It was only about a week ago. I was walking home from my cousin's house in the dark. I had my flashlight shining, and I felt safe. But something's off. The barn lights are on, and they're never on. No one ever goes in there. The floors are falling through. I simply brush it off as a technical error. But then, in the middle of the field, I see someone in the same pig mask, and he saw me. His words have haunted my dreams since then, yelling, "Get out of here, before I make you." The way he said it terrifies me, so vicious, like he wants to kill me, and I haven't been there since. It was later discovered that in that barn, they'd been setting up shop for some time. I'm so glad that nothing ever come of it, and they never actually truly come for me.